Hey guys, how's it going? So I wanted to try to do a bit of a quick reading update. So this weekend I ended up getting a break from my interviews because due to inclement weather in Iowa, the university I was going to go interview at was in Iowa. The professor that I was going to that I was applying to work with emailed me telling me that I might want to consider rescheduling just because I was planning to drive, and driving in the snow that was happening in Iowa would have been pretty bad. So it's supposed to snow today as well, and today would have been the day I would have been driving back. So I rescheduled for early March. So I ended up getting a weekend off, which was perfect because Thursday was actually my birthday. So I got tonight I'm going out with some friends to celebrate. Anyway, I just wanted to give a reading update because my reading has changed. What I've been reading has changed since the last time I made a video. So I don't know if I'll call this a Friday Reads, but anyway, it's just a reading update. So I mentioned this book in my last video, in my last tag video, and it's Living Must Bury by Josie Sigler. I bought this while I was at an interview in Fayetteville, Arkansas. On the Saturday after the interview, I had some time, so the grad student took me around Fayetteville, and we stopped at the Dixon Street bookstore, which is an incredible bookstore. It's a used bookstore, and you see it from the outside, and it's just kind of a corner at the corner of a block, and it doesn't look very big from the outside, but you go in, and there are just labyrinths of books. You can go back and back and back in that bookstore, and there are all sorts of nooks and crannies where there are books stored. There will just be one random, you will turn and there will be just one kind of random compartment, and it'll just be filled with books, and you can go off to the side, and it's almost like a maze. And it was just incredible. There were so many books there that I wanted to buy, but I picked up this one because I read the first poem and thought it sounded cool. It was also in a section of the bookstore that was for small presses, which I thought was kind of interesting. And I kind of would like to get into reading more small presses, or books from more small presses, that is. You don't really read presses. But so this collection is a series of poems that are all kind of interconnected, loosely interconnected. And they deal with a lot of suffering, basically. Basically, this whole collection is just about suffering. About suffering, exploitation, violence, both physical and emotional, and against humans and against animals. There's a poem in here where where Josie Sigler alludes to a dysfunctional family, an abusive father. There's one where she alludes to the Holocaust. There's one where she talks about the slaughter of animals. She explores so many different ways in which people and animals suffer and feel sorrow, and reasons for feeling sorrow. And it's done in kind of, she has some odd disjointed syntax, which could make it a bit hard to read sometimes, but I feel like overall she just explores it incredibly powerfully, and throughout it kind of, there's a feeling permeating the whole collection where you feel like it's told in such a way that the narrator just longs for a world where, this doesn't happen, where this sort of cruelty and suffering doesn't happen. It was just beautiful. So I thought I would just read the last few verses of the very last poem because I thought they were very beautiful. The air smelled of almonds just before we lost everything. Just before I went down on my knees for those who evidenced the violence done between souls. Dead bee on the pillowcase. Oh, the pollen. So, anyway, that's just a small snippet. Anyway, I thought this was very powerful. I definitely want to reread it. I might be rereading it later this year for the reread-a-thon, which I've been neglecting, but I'm still participating in. But anyway, there's Living Must Bury by Josie Sigler. Next, I wanted to give you an update on my reading of the Histories of Herodotus. So I have kind of taken a break from the Histories. just because it's very long, and it is not the easiest reading all the time. And there were just other books that I wanted to read, and so I stopped about halfway through. I'm just about at the point where the wars between Persia and Greece, I think, are about to sort of get into full swing, and I figured that just before that happens might be a good place to stop, so that when I start up again, I'll be very kind of engaged by that. But yeah, I'm still loving it, and I mentioned the difficulties of reading Herodotus, because he mentioned so many names, so many different groups of people, so many locations and stuff, and I talked about how it can be hard to keep track of, and that was the main difficulty. And I actually think that once you've read maybe 100 pages of Herodotus, you kind of just get used to that and just adjust and get over it, and it becomes not so much of a problem. At least I'm finding. I think you just kind of learn to roll with it, and just try to kind of keep a mental catalog a little bit. You're not going to remember everyone's name, every group's name, but you don't need to either. He will remind you often of who these people are, and yeah. So anyway, I'm still enjoying this. There's still there's intrigue, there's wars, there's weird kings who kind of go insane, which an insane leader who in the United States can't relate to that. But anyway, so yeah, I'm still liking this. I'm gonna finish it, don't worry. But the reason I want to take a break from it is because a friend of mine has lent me The Gene by Siddhartha Mukherjee. So my friend who lent it to me, she studies behavioral genetics, and that is basically just a fancy way of saying psychology and how it relates to genetics, like how psychology is inherited from generation to generation, sort of. So she wants to do a lot of twin studies, which is common in genetic studies. And but so I actually bought this for her birthday, and because I thought she would like it because it's about genetics. And she did, and she read it and liked it, and asked me if I wanted to borrow it and read it, and I said absolutely. So I just wanted to read this just to make sure that I get it back to her on time, because our time here at WIU is coming to an end. We're in our last semester of this program, so we're going to be parting ways at the end of the semester, so I want to make sure I can get that back to her. Not that this is going to take me too long. It's pretty easy reading. So he goes through the history of the study of genetics, and along the way you learn a lot about genetics, and so far a lot of it has been stuff I already know, like the story of the beagle and Darwin's voyage on the beagle, the basic tenets of natural selection and all this stuff, as well as the experiments of Gregor Mendel with the peas, and now he's talking a lot about eugenics and its use in the United States and in Nazi Germany, and it's very interesting, and so far a lot of it is review, but not all of it. I am learning a lot that I didn't know. For example, I actually didn't know that there were certain pairs of genes that are inherited together. He talks about experiments done on flies, and there were certain attributes that were always inherited together, and I can't remember specifically what they were, but there was a gene for like a white eye, which was always inherited with like a certain like skin color for the well, I guess flies don't really have skin, but exoskeleton color for the flies, or something of that sort. And I didn't actually know that. So I am learning things, and I know I'm going to, Siddhartha Mukherjee, I know is going to get into areas that I know very little about. So as the book goes along, I will probably be learning more and more, and hopefully be enjoying it more and more for that reason. So yeah, and then I'm still continuing my buddy read of the Silmarillion with Elena Makridina, and I'm still loving it just as much as I read it the first time. When Elena and I finish our buddy read, I think I'm going to do a video where I just talk about my experience of rereading the Silmarillion, because I have kind of neglected to do any videos relating to the rereadathon that Catalyst Reads is hosting. So I would like to do some videos specifically on that, and I want to make sure I make a point of rereading some books too for the rereadathon, because I don't want to just neglect that. I wanted to reread stuff, so I should do it. And I told Catalyst Reads that I wanted to do it, so I would feel bad if I kind of fell out of it. So yeah, I actually, though, I will admit, I kind of just powered through and finished the Silmarillion last week. which I just did because just because I was motivated and enjoying rereading it again. But I'm gonna make the videos when they're supposed to come out on the same day that Elena makes hers. So yeah, the Silmarillion. And then lastly, the other book I was reading before that I mentioned, Arguably by Christopher Hitchens. I got about 70% of the way through this, so quite a ways. And the absolute strongest parts of this are when Christopher Hitchens is writing about books. There are a lot of book reviews in here. There are a lot of essays about authors. And those definitely are the highlight of the collection. He introduced me to so many authors and books that I either didn't know about or hadn't previously been interested in reading. The Diaries of Victor Klemperer, who was this Jew living in Nazi Germany, and he wrote these diaries of his time living in Nazi Germany, and then he wrote these diaries after the fall of Nazi Germany. He wrote diaries about living in East Germany, because he happened to be living in East Germany. And Christopher Hitchens made me want to read that. Christopher Hitchens made me want to read Thomas Paine. Christopher Hitchens made me want to read Karl Marx, finally. And a lot of others. Black Lamb and Grey Falcon by Rebecca West. That was the other one that I really want to read, which was sort of this book by Rebecca West, who is an essayist, journalist, who wrote this account of her travels through Yugoslavia and for her love of that country. And Christopher Hitchens has a 30-page introduction to that book that's included here. And yeah, he really sold me on that book. But those are just some. There are a lot of books in here that he has made me want to read. And others that he talks about and that I, find what he has to say interesting, but that I'm not necessarily tripping over myself to go read, but that I still loved hearing about from him. And then there are other essays in here that aren't about books, that are, they're okay. Sometimes he'll assume that the reader knows more than you might necessarily nowadays about the events he's talking about. There's an essay in here called Why Women Aren't Funny, and I feel like he tries to come off as a guy who's actually a feminist in that essay by arguing that women aren't funny, but just kind of ends up as coming off as benevolently sexist. So that wasn't stellar. So there are weak points in here, as you would expect in such a giant collection. This is almost 800 pages. And I'm not as interested in his essays on current events. I'm more interested in what he has to say about books. And I think I exhausted the essays in here that are about books that I would get interested in or be interested in hearing about. So yeah, that's why I stopped reading. I stopped reading when I got through about 70% of this book. I still want to kind of chip away at it and get through the rest of the essays in it. But it won't be a priority. Because I just wasn't looking forward to reading the essays that that I hadn't read yet in here. Just because they weren't on topics that I was terribly into. So yeah, that is just a reading update. I have one more interview next week, and then I rescheduled my Iowa State interview for March 2nd. So I should be hopefully getting into making more regular videos soon. But we'll see. No promises. Because I'm also finishing my thesis, and I still have classes that I'm busy with. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Bye.